That's not.
All right, we're live now.
I'll refresh. Get on it. Yeah, all good.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. So we'll give it a couple of minutes for people to join. We're actually on time for once, which is great.
Yeah. I think there's a couple on that.
Great.
Yeah, all good. Oh, fantastic. So we'll give it a couple of minutes for people to join.
So Ed, they've kind of said officially that gyms and fitness places, I'm assuming that includes martial arts gyms, a couple of weeks to open. But based on yesterday's scenes from London, what are your thoughts on that? Do you still think it's going to be?
So you know me. I opened my academy. Last week we opened with the strictest and most stringent policies, and we took a lot of planning into that. And we took the advice of a doctor who's been involved in the COVID fight in both Spain and France. And you know, we're not a gym. You guys are not a gym. We're something totally different. We don't have weights facilities. Talking for myself, we don't have, weight machines and, that sort of thing. And we can train without being close contact. For you guys, whether you're doing forms or karate guys doing katas, solo forms, the risk would be the same as walking through a shopping mall right now or going to a pub. It's ludicrous. It's crazy. And listen, my academy wasn't built to fall, and it's not going to fall.
Yeah.
And that's my mentality. As long as I do it right, do it safe, and do it with the strictest and stringent guidelines, then, you've seen what we did with that, with fogging machines and anti-back stuff that we're using to fog the air.
Limited classes, booking, making time between sessions too.
And the doctor that was supporting us said it's actually more safer, he deems it, than hospital facilities with how we're doing that.
Wow.
So very stringent, very strict with what we're doing.
That'll be good information for anyone that's got a school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The amount of people that have messaged me, and some are for, some are against. Well, I'm sorry, I have mortgage and bills to pay. I have, like everyone, I have students that I'm, dedicated to. And this is something that I've held dear and built since 2002.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to let it just slip away,
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, we've got people joining. That's great. Just check I'm recording. All right. We're at 5 past. Should we just kick off, Al? And then people join.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Today we have Professor Eddie Kone, 2nd degree Gracie Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Been teaching Gracie Jiu-Jitsu since the early 2000s. Has a very detailed approach to teaching, and he has a direct lineage to Grandmaster Helio Gracie and his sons. Eddie has EKBJJ, which is his main academy in London. Affiliates all over the place. What he teaches works in terms of self-defense, works in terms of the cage, and much more. Former police officer, EKBJJ, Professor Eddie Kone, great teachings, great philosophy, lifestyle, and a fighting art, and all coming from Grandmaster Helio Gracie. I trained with Professor Eddie since a blue belt, right?
Yeah.
And I come from another teacher, Professor Arlen Sakara, but Professor Eddie has always had a very open door policy and very willing to teach. No matter where you're from, he has an open door policy, and that's something that I highly respected. And I might not be able to train all the time, but as always, going to Eddie for the self-defense and to improve my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And you'll learn more about that from Professor Eddie himself. Eddie, welcome. Thank you for joining. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us. For those that also don't know, Professor Eddie has trained UFC fighters, trained cage fighters, ran his own cage MMA fighting team. So there's a lot we can learn from him in terms of training, in terms of legal ramifications from a UK law, but it probably works across a lot of laws in different countries. And of course, for any misconceptions or any learnings around Gracie Jiu-Jitsu as a martial art that we see prevalent within UFC to this day. So welcome, Eddie. Really good to have you, mate.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me this little platform to come and share, because that's the idea of martial arts, is to share, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Obtain knowledge, and hopefully we can do that today. You know, we can all learn from each other, and we can see what fits where and how it all merges together, or it doesn't, or any kind of questions that we have. Great to be here.
So first questions we always kick off is, tell us a bit about you and how you your training history and how you eventually came to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So Eddie Kone, I won't say my age, but I'm up there. Been around the block a few times. So I began training very early on in karate. So that was the kind of in thing back then. It was karate and kickboxing, and then onto Thai boxing. And throughout the years, I've always not subconsciously wanted to test myself, and I don't mean that in its fighting art. Any fighting art is good. It's as good as the person beholding those skills. But for me, it was about testing myself and kind of just, as a youngster growing up in the East End, we had so many names and faces back then that were tough guys, right? Growing up in the East End was no joke back then, because it was fisticuffs. That will tell you how old, give you an indication of how old I am. That was one of the old school fisticuffs where you would settle it on the cobbled stone outside, and then you'd probably find yourself shaking hands with that guy and being cool after that. But at that moment, it needed to be done. And so I came from a background of karate. One of my very first karate instructors was a guy called Peter Tabby. And he used to train at the John Orwell Centre, or Wapping Sports Centre as it was then known, in East London. And I came across him. I trained with people like Xian, Greg Wallace, not the Superfoot, Bill Wallace, Greg Wallace, who used to train military kind of big guy, Victor Wade, Tyrone Herod for Thai boxing, Bill Judd, the kind of usual, that kind of circle of people. So that's where my martial arts started. And, I want to kind of just throw it out there from the beginning. There's something totally different between martial arts, street fighting, and sports jiu-jitsu, sports competitive. They're all different things. The same like MMA is not real. It's still a sport, still has rules and rounds and regulations, and people often get misconceived. but we'll come to that. I then went into judo at a young age, a little bit of judo, but my predominantly background was Muay Thai. That was my kind of prominent martial art.
Yeah.
Fast forward a few years, and then as I grew, and being in the martial arts circle, I got exposed to various martial arts, and people like Bob Breen, who's a dear friend of mine, and one of the most amazing martial artists that I've ever encountered, who's a student of Danny Nosanto, who is was a student of Bruce Lee and the JKD guys, and to this day, when I train with Bob, he's a fearsome adversary, because he understands fighting all areas, fighting with dimensions and angles, and he understands, the purity of what you can and can't get away with in a real fight. So I went through that kind of phase, and then I came across Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in just before 1993. It was actually 92 in Brazil. We were out there for a Thai boxing tournament, and I heard about this family, and I came across them out there. Came back to the UK looking for them, and then, as most people, a VHS emerged in 1993, a VHS cassette, where we saw Royce Gracie do his thing against all styles of martial arts.
Yeah.
And that began my journey of jiu-jitsu as we know it. Now, meanwhile, during that journey, I became a Metropolitan Police officer. So I joined the Metropolitan Police, which I was there for 18 years. And throughout my entire journey as a police officer, and I wasn't just a PC plod. For example, I belonged to SO13, which was the Specialist Firearms and Operations Group back then.
Yeah.
SO19, CTSFO, so counterterrorism. We were skilled in rapid entry. You name it, we did it. We were like the SWAT version. And it wasn't, I'm not saying that to be cool, but it will come back later on to why martial arts is beneficial for all as a self-defense, skill set.
Yeah.
Because like I said, there are various skill sets. So I kind of but I fell into the grounds of when I'd arrest people or when I detain people, or even how I'd interact with people, how my awareness and how my martial arts would always be with me, would always be present, and it would always serve me well, whether it was just, whether I had to be just, firm, or fair. So then fast forward a few more years, competed in MMA, fought in some jiu-jitsu tournaments, which I wasn't very good at. And I'm not a world champion, have never been a world champion, don't claim to be a world champion. And then arrived much later on in a teaching environment with my own schools, which then led to an affiliation, which then also led to other schools around the world, like globally. I know you've traveled with me to Romania, right, Nish, to train out there. And I have various other schools, which we do have world champions in. But again, we can touch on that later, because that's not the be all and end all. So that's where we're at the moment.
Right. And so how did you come to start jiu-jitsu, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu?
I came across it by accident in Brazil.
Yeah. Bearing
in mind I was young, athletic. I thought, my right hand and right leg kick would stop everyone, Turned up into the Gracie Academy, actually was introduced by a bag carrier in the hotel we were staying at. He was telling us about these guys who would fight anyone and win. And we were like, well, let's go see. And when I went to the academy, there was a who's who of people in there. The icons and the giants of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu were all there at that moment. So you're talking Hickson, you're talking Royce, you're talking Hoyley, you're talking Grandmaster Elio, you're talking all of the main family members that were there, And I didn't know who they were at the time. And it was a very strange time for me because I was young, in my prime, and they pitted me up with someone at sparring time and said, listen, we did the class, and they were like, listen, we're going to train a little, you can strike, you can do whatever you want, and you know, we're going to show you what it is. So of course we went in, put our gloves on, tried to do what we could. We would take it. All I can explain to you was, it was like being in a tumble dryer. I went, you know, I tried to scrap with a guy left, right, upside down. Next thing I'm on the ground, my arm's being broke, I'm being choked, and all with a smile on their face. They did it all with the Brazilians have a wonderful smile, and they did it very friendly. Yeah. And listen, I kid you not, I felt violated that day. You know, I'd been, you know, fighting in tournaments, of Thai boxing tournaments. I'd been around some of the best Thai fighters in the UK. And then to have that happen to me when I was trying, you know, not to knock them out, but you're trying, inspiring to at least land a telling blow. Yeah. And I didn't land a shot on them. And I came back, and I remember that night in the hotel, we were sitting in the hotel and turned the lights off, and I was sitting there licking my wounds in the dark. You know, not open wounds, but you know, the mental, like, replaying what happened. I couldn't believe what happened to me. And the next day we flew back, and then 2 weeks after that, I flew out there again. Right. I was hooked from that point. And yeah, I've never looked back since. I've been back and forward. I've managed to become really good friends with the Gracies and their family and the brothers, including the old man, Grandmaster Elio, who passed away, as we know. And not only understand the fighting arts or the fighting philosophies that comes with that, but also understand the history, what made it the spectacle it was, why it had such an explosion, because a true martial artist will know that and be able to explain that and show their lineage and show, you know, to their students, so that it doesn't die, it doesn't get watered, and it doesn't die, because that's what happened. It started to water down a little bit. And it started to become what I would consider an exotic, which is, you know, if I do this to you, your head will explode. You know, well, we need to see that. We need to see that in its physicality and understand it. And that was beginning to happen. And I always refer to trying to keep the teeth in jiu-jitsu, trying to keep the teeth in Gracie jiu-jitsu.
So how did Gracie jiu-jitsu start? Can you tell us a bit about the beginnings, how it formed?
Of course, yeah. It's there are many stories out there, and I'll offer you some reference points where you guys can go and view, go and research. Whatever I'm saying, don't take for gospel. Please go and do your own research, and I will always stand to be corrected if mistaken. Sure. The Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is a byproduct. Okay, it's its own product, but it's a byproduct. If we go back to India, if we go back to those times, there were grappling arts, no doubt about it. You know, we can prove that. If you go Pancratian times, they were fighting in arenas to the death. Jiu-Jitsu, as we know it, began its roots in India, and it traveled through. You know, it came through China. It kind of passed a lot of countries and arrived in Japan, where at the time there were clans. There were different clans, or different clans, different families, if you like. Some of them were masters in, say, swimming, sui-jitsu, as it's known. Some of them were masters in archery. Some of them were masters in camouflage. Some of them were masters in field weapons, sickles, and you know. And what happened, with my knowledge, was the samurai were the king's guards originally. Assassins were ninjas. There was a whole thing that happened in that time. And when they began to outlaw jiu-jitsu because of its fighting prowess, if you like, everything in traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu was to kill or maim. It wasn't for a sport. A lot of people have misconceived and think that jiu-jitsu came from judo, when that wasn't the case. Judo came from jiu-jitsu, from the art of jiu-jitsu. Forget Gracie's right now. That hasn't happened yet. But they watered it down, and what happened was they made it more, because it was outlawed, they made it more open for people to come and learn, rather than, oh, it's a killing art and the maiming art. And then, of course, the Kodokan, the famous Kodokan, was formed. And there were many emissaries going around the world at that time. There were emissaries going everywhere. And not only were they emissaries, but they were judokas. They'd practiced the art of judo. Now, some of these emissaries had never put down their jiu-jitsu because of their clan and their family heritage, had never put down jiu-jitsu and called it judo, right? They never put that down. So they'd kept the warrior fighting spirit. Yeah. One emissary was someone called Count Kone, or Mitsui Maeda, as he was known. Came to Brazil and began to befriend the Gracies, who lived, I believe, in the south at that time. Now, there's a common misconception. People believe that Grandmaster Elio Gracie took lessons from Mitsui Maeda. It's a common mistake. He never took a lesson from Mitsui Maeda in his life. He never set eyes on him. Mitsui Maeda taught Gaston Gracie, I believe, George Gracie, Carlos Gracie. At that moment, Maeda would, to make money on the side, he would go to circus events and fight. He would fight in these matches in circus events using jiu-jitsu, not judo.
What year was this, Ed?
I'd have to go back and check, but it was early 30s, I believe.
Okay. Yep.
I believe I need to reference that point. At the time, George Gracie, the red herring of the Gracie family, because of his bright red hair, was involved in these circus fights. He was involved in these fights with wrestlers in the circus. You know, where they would say, if you can stay 2 minutes with this guy, it was that kind of thing.
Free popcorn.
Yeah, kind of. And there was no, what's the word I'm looking for? There was no real fighter in the Gracie family. They would fight, but the art was still developing. They were still being taught the original ways of the Japanese. And we'll come to something that happened later on. So fast forward a few years, and of course, 1952, the original Gracie Academy opened in Rio de Janeiro, Botafogo, above the university. It's the original academy. Academia Gracie, that opened 1952. And the instructors there were Carlos and a couple of the others. I don't remember the names of the Gracies that were instructed. Elio wasn't an instructor. You have to bear in mind, Elio was considered medically unwell. He wasn't athletic. He wasn't fit. And he didn't take that lesson. Like, people think, oh, they taught him. This is where this conception of Elio is the founder of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu rather than the innovator of.
Okay.
So there's a common misconception. And I understand fully why people refer to him as the founder of Jiu-Jitsu or Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when actually he was the Einstein behind it. He was the innovator. Okay, he made the adjustments to make it better, you know, to make it suit him and to modify it in a way where it wasn't rigid anymore, where one throw, one kill, one punch, one kill. He knew there was much more to fighting and the intricacies of technique and leverage over brute force and strength.
Right.
So he began to watch and learn and adapt. And they changed it so much that it has literally become its own art. It's nothing like its Japanese counterpart, or its brother, if you like. And it's nothing like the sportive element of jiu-jitsu that we know. I'm talking about Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It has components of both, and it's able to live in all worlds.
Yeah.
But in its own world, it's its own thing.
Mm.
For example, there are 5 components to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. People are not aware of that. There are actually 7, but we focus on the main 5. And the main 5 components of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu are striking, clinching, takedowns, throwing, and finally, ground grappling.
Yeah.
And then we have the mindset that govern all of that. And then, of course, we have the weapons defense.
Yeah.
Right? So people confused by that. People confused. I'm talking about pure Gracie Jiu-Jitsu as taught by Grandmaster Elio Gracie and his sons.
Yeah.
If you don't know those components, plus the mindset, what makes it hold together and what makes it work, and the weapons self-defense, you cannot call yourself Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. It's something else.
Yeah.
If your first and primary objective is to go to the ground in a street fight, that's something else. It's the last option. And that's why it comes in those options. Striking, clinching, takedowns. So a takedown would be something like when both legs are on the ground and we would tackle you. Throwing techniques when both legs leave the ground. So kick throw, seonagi, you know, both legs leave the ground. And finally, ground grappling, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Right? So people are very confused with that, even till today.
Yeah.
Confused. So when the Gracies as a family start to modify this incredible art, or Grandmaster Elio start to become an Einstein and innovate it, which is why I understand why people refer to him as the founder of. And you know, they were. You cannot talk about Carlos without Elio, and you cannot talk about Elio without Carlos, because together they were in it together. And if you know your history, when Elio began to fight and win, Carlos retired and then took on the form of Elio's mentor, his coach, the guy behind the diet and the physical aspects, right? The health benefits, because we'll come to later when we talk about self-defense. Health defense is a big part of self-defense. Our health and well-being is self-defense. It's our body self-defense, right? So there was a point where the Japanese came to Brazil and awarded Elio and Carlos black belts to call the art judo again. And they respectfully declined. They said, we're not going to do that because this is something else, right? Now, also a lot of people feel that, you know, the Gracies were amazing street fighters and this and that. They had a lot of challenge fights. They did, you know, they would go and fight, seek out. And this goes back in history to all martial arts. It happened in Kung Fu. It happened all over. You know, one person would go to another, oh, you're the tough guy here, I'm the tough guy, let's duke it out and see who wins. Now, you could have that fight 3 or 4 times. And maybe you win 3 and they win 2, right? So that's what was happening in Brazil at the time. It was a very violent city. And they would go in and they'd stamp their authority by doing that. They would go and challenge people.
And they had an open door, right?
Right. They had an open door policy, which their family members still have today.
Yeah.
You know, they still have the open challenge door policy. So if we're talking about the dynasty to where it is, to where it came from, to how it came, to what is still current in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and what has been missed out. Now, when we say missed out, what I'm saying is, as an instructor of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and an advocate, is it's not that sports schools' fault that they missed out. Maybe their focus is sport. Maybe their focus is making names and building their students to win medals, and that's absolutely fine. But what you cannot do is claim to be Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or advocate self-defense if you're talking about a sportive art and claiming it's Gracie Jiu-Jitsu when it's not. You know, it's not Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And the same with our Japanese counterparts. They cannot say, oh, we are Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. There are some very similar aspects, same as judo, but it's not the same. It's not taught the same. It's not delivered the same. It's not advocated the same. And it's 2 totally different things, you know?
Right.
Now, that's not necessarily that instructor's fault. They've joined a school, you know, become accustomed to the ways, and they know no different. That's not their fault. But if you really want to give your students the complete package, what you claim to be a fighting system, or what I refer to as martial science, because that's what it is. You know, we're attacking the human anatomy in its weakest, right? We're attacking it and we're dissecting it and taking it apart. But you want them to be safe, then you need to understand the components of self-defense.
Right.
And that's my advocation of that.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Interesting.
So what was your early training like, Ed? I mean, what was your first lesson like, and how did it progress?
It was different. It was different to how it is now. I mean, I literally got thrown in with the Lions, the young Lions, and it was hard because they didn't speak English. They had some people who had broken English. We were seen as money cows back then, in the nicest possible way. They're a very poor country. They're very beautiful people.
And just to confirm, in those times, I mean, finding Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in London, UK,
didn't exist.
or Europe, it didn't exist, right?
It didn't exist.
Didn't exist.
It was a small corner of Brazil.
Yeah.
At that time, they were just exposing themselves. Hickson had just fought in the 1996. Not Pride, yeah. It was just being exposed in Japan, the early 90s. And Hickson had just gone to Coliseum in 2000 and fought Funaki, the rings champion in Japan. And the Gracies were seen as the Lions, they were seen as the pinnacle point.
Yeah.
And then, so the training was very hard. It was very different back then. It was very lonely. It wasn't how it is today. The camaraderie was there. The fighting spirit was definitely there. The faces were there. The people were there. The understanding was very different. For example, an arm lock was always an arm lock. Shovey brush. It was always an arm lock. It was never Americana, Kimura. They had no names. Arm lock was arm lock.
Yeah.
So you really had to be in tune with what was happening. And then over the years, people started to list. Now, when I started to train there, Hoist didn't speak English. Hoyler didn't speak English. Holker still doesn't speak so good, right? So you can imagine they were the leading, like Hoist wasn't actually there, but they were leading the class. Now, when I went to Torrance to train with Horian and Hoist, Horian had been in the States a while and he got it. He was learning and classes were still kind of starting to develop and grow then.
Yeah.
Very, very different.
And did you start, was it like a curriculum? Was it like...
Curriculum has always been the same and will always be the same. We have a curriculum.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in curriculum-based training. I believe it gives students the knowledge, the repetition, the understanding, because remember, in my school, we're not creating fighters. That's the worst thing you can do, is create a fighter. What we're trying to create is teachers, people who can carry the torch for the art and put it in its proper light and be able to disseminate and transmit that information correctly so the art remains.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get twisted and added. Now, don't get me wrong. There are times to do that. We're always updating information and knowledge, but the curriculum is the curriculum.
Yeah. And so did you initially start with self-defense? Was it like...
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Initially with the self-defense curriculum from white all the way to black.
And how does that look?
Okay, so the self-defense curriculum is broken into 5 or 6 different facets.
Yeah.
And it's everything from the most common attacks. Now there are people get this mistaken. What they say is, it's just a wrist grab, it's a neck grab. We focus solely, our self-defense system is the stand-up self-defense positions from surprise attack.
Right.
Because it's different if we start to argue. If we start to argue one-on-one, then my hand should be up. I should start to create a little bit of distance or close the distance, maybe preemptive strike, whatever it is, right? To create that distance or that closure of distance. So it's, if I've got my headphones on at a bus stop, someone grabs me from behind, someone grabs a bag off a lady, someone puts their hands around the neck and push you into the wall. It's developing the reflex of the stand-up self-defense. And that runs from white to blue. There's a very specific curriculum for that.
And these are based on some of the most common attacks.
The most common.
Yeah.
Apart from being sucker punched or hit over the back of the head, which you could not protect from, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so when you're talking about self-defense, you're talking about awareness being number one.
Mm-hmm.
Being aware of your surroundings. Where am I? Why is that guy looking at me twice? That car circled here twice. There's a bunch of guys over there looking at me. Do I need to remove myself from the situation? Because if we have to go hands-on, then we failed the initial part of self-defense. We've now gone into self-offense, right? It's no longer defense now, because sometimes we would have to fight out of a situation rather than defend ourselves. And that's part of the mindset people get, misconceived with. When I was growing up, I can remember I had a karate license, and the license said, I promise to uphold the true spirit of karate do and blah, blah, and give someone a warning should they, meanwhile, giving them a warning, I've had my eye gouged out, my ear ripped off. It worked, right? So yeah, it's much more than people think. You can have a bunch of techniques and say that's self-defense, but if you have no governing principles or guidelines that you can
strategies,
right?
Yeah,
that's never going to happen. When I've served in many host countries and around the globe in my capacity as a service individual, as a specialist service person, and all of my stuff has come from trusting the training, trusting what we do, working as a team, being able to differentiate unarmed combat and armed combat. There's all sorts of ramifications that come into play with it. And I believe that martial arts now is being changed. We're losing it daily across the board, all martial arts. You're having people pop up with weird and wonderful names where they're trying to blend this and that, but the foundation isn't there. There's no foundation. So it falls apart at the fringes. We have MMA schools opening one a penny before lockdown. Everyone was opening an MMA school because it was cool. And they would send these guys in to fight MMA with no knowledge. And serious injuries could happen, potentially. And we don't have, in the MMA world, apart from at the elite level, you don't have a governing body like the Nevada Athletic State Commission. You don't have that in martial arts. Now, I don't know about you guys, but jiu-jitsu there's no governing body. There's the IBJJF for sport jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
If we have to take insurance out, we fall into like judo insurance and stuff. There's nothing there, right? And this in itself is bad news, because anyone can open a school.
I wasn't aware of that. I thought there was a governing body.
Show me.
I didn't know that.
Because there's so much interfighting. You have the IBJJF, the CBJJF, the Confederation. There's so much. No one really wants to hold true the art. Hickson came out with the JJGF or whatever it is, the Global Jiu-Jitsu Federation. Yeah. But they're arguing amongst themselves. So it's like it's become political now. We're not a political movement, and I think we need to really hone in on that.
Yeah.
Find a credible lineage, a credible instructor.
Yeah.
It has to be, and everyone's battling on these.
It would benefit everyone.
Excuse me?
It would benefit everyone if there was that umbrella that actually was there for insurance purposes, for everything else.
Right. But for everything, when you had a committee made up of lots of different people from lots of different schools, where there wasn't one singular governing body, where we could all get together and say, okay, great. That's what it is. Where the self-defense can come back into jiu-jitsu. And the sportive guys will feel comfortable when they wear a black belt and say, hey, I know self-defense. I really know it. And not just a couple of moves, right? Because I've seen some horrendous stuff on YouTube appear of jiu-jitsu guys jumping guard and getting smashed on the floor and knocked out, having no idea of how to defend punches, both standing and on the ground, having no idea of, trying to break someone's arm in a street fight. It's never going to work. They're going to keep fighting. You need to be able to stop that threat dead in its tracks.
It talks about the 5 components. It talks about you started off striking, and that's that standing self-defense, striking, and it goes all the way through to black belts. So is it taught as a standalone unit, or is it incorporated into the training throughout
both
each of the grades?
Both. Right. So we could, for example, I could bring a student out and say, show me. Because remember, we're not showing them to exchange firepower to make them professional fighters.
Right.
We're simply showing Joe Public, who comes in, is if you take a palm and push that into someone's nose, a desired effect is going to happen. If you close a fist and punch someone in the nose, this is what's going to happen. And only through repetition are they able to do that. And then when that's incorporated into sparring, live sparring, then they get familiar with not only delivering firepower, but receiving firepower.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, if I was to fight a grappler myself, I'm going to strike with him. There's no way I'm going to give him the advantage. He might be the best. He might have invented taking the back and choking someone out. He might have a million ways to get there. So I'm going to limit that, right?
Yeah.
If there's emptiness in that fight, I'm going to strike him, you know? If I'm ground grappling with someone, if they're a striker, I'm going to take them to the ground. I'm going to take them to the weakest area I can, right?
Right.
If he's a good wrestler and I can't take him to the ground or I can't clinch him, then I'm going to strike him and make him drop his hands or do something so I can get in, so I can dirty box on the inside, so I can get into the headbutting and the gouging and all the rest of it. Or I'm going to use the strikes to disengage and run away. Right? So the strategies we employ in those situations are really, really important.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you guys have those strategies. I'm sure you
have to choose your battles wisely, you know. Right. It's all good having ego and thinking you'll take out 20 guys. You won't.
It's not going to happen. Even one guy. Listen, I always say this to my students: the longer you're involved in a violent confrontation, the higher the risk of serious injury or death. The higher the risk, you know.
Yeah.
And I've seen very, very few in my whole time one-punch knockouts. You know, I've seen very few because people know they're going to get hit in the face. People know that. You know, if you start messing around, like, you know, with a girl, if you have female friends, the first thing women naturally gravitate towards is a punch in the groin. That's a showstopper. Right?
Yeah.
You could be punched in the chops and you'd be like, okay, I've been hit in the face. Now I want to fight. But one of those sly elbows that they give you in the groin, they leave you reeling on the floor, right? Even messing around, you know, like hammer fist messing around.
Yeah.
And my daughters have done this to me, messing around and boom. You know, so it's kind of a natural instinct for them.
Yeah.
You know? So
do you actually do you practice? Do you have a set routine of practicing striking, or
yes,
you do? Yeah. And so you just practice. Say your however many attacks or whatever. That's what you focus on for the striking.
So it works. It works like this. We will first have a career. People when they come into, I'm talking about someone who I always look at people like they've never trained before.
Yeah.
So they walk in. And I asked them, have you trained? No, I've never trained. Okay, why are you here? I've come to learn self-defense, feel more confident, you know, and whatever it is. So it takes years. There's reasons boxers rack their hands, right? There's reasons they wear gloves. They want to break their hand. So we would try to emphasize with them, you know, fighting stance, first of all, strong stance and posture. And then perhaps they would start to learn that by pushing their hand out in a certain way, it becomes a jab. It becomes a jab. And then the backhand would be the power cross. And then a knee, lead knee, rear knee, pisao, which is a stomp kick to the knee, which you see Hoist use all the time. Elbows, sideways, upwards, downwards, backwards, making them aware that what their body can do with striking. Right. And then as they progress and they become more proficient in that, we then say, okay, off of this strike, you could enter into a clinch. Off of this strike, you could disengage. You know, if someone grabs you here, you may not want to strip the grips because if they're holding you, they're not hitting you. So it might be more viable to hit them and move rather than get involved in some clinch with them.
So you're making the linkage between striking and clinching
as
you go along.
Right. So then the clinching then becomes, hey, listen, they're stronger than I am. They're more capable than I am in the standing department. So then the takedown comes into play. And if we can't get the takedown, then we go into the throwing. And if we can't throw them, if they're heavier or whatever, we have the option of disengaging.
Right.
You know?
Coming back to those five initial things.
5 components.
Yeah.
Now, meanwhile, we're talking about just those 5 components. My spidey sense, if you like, from the initial confrontation as that individual is walking towards me is, are the hands open or closed? Are they in pockets? You know, is there a concealed weapon here? While I'm involved in that clinch or grapple, Have I taken note of his fighting stance standing? Has he hit me with his right or left hand first? Because it's going to be dominant. Okay, it's going to be his reptilian mind throwing that first shot. So he's untrained. So it's going to be his power shot. So when we hit the ground, or if we hit the ground, if I clinch him and push him into a wall, am I then controlling the strong arm? Because I know that neurologically, he's going to be stronger that side. His reflexes are going to be less on his weaker side. And he's highly unlikely to be as accurate or as effective throwing weaker hand shots than he is stronger hand shots. So there's all this kind of stuff that goes with that.
Yeah, that's quite good. It's scientific, isn't it?
Starts from a very early on. Now some of your viewers may watch and go, oh, well, how do you do that? Like, how can you, what, are you just walking around paranoid? Actually, yeah, I am, you know. Actually, I'm not walking around like a ninja and creeping around.
Yeah.
What I am doing is I'm raising my vision and awareness, and I'm looking around and I'm questioning everything that doesn't look right to me.
Yeah.
So for example, if I'm walking in the street and I catch the eyes of another human, more than likely they're predators or they're aware. Usually the prey don't do that. Just step on a train and look around. You see people in a book. But if you catch someone upright looking at you, for sure, they're either very aware or they're predators.
Yeah.
And when two predators meet, they'll go, not that guy. They look at, these are disgusting individuals, these cockroaches of society that prey on the vulnerable and the weak. But when we look at them and they know the look and we know the look, they'll give that a wide berth. Remember, there's an old saying, I don't have to beat the bear. I just have to beat you. And if I can catch you on the drop, if I'm quicker than you off the mark, you know, my presence is enough to shut things down. Yeah. And that differs if there are multiple assailants or groups of people.
Yeah.
Because then they become brave.
A mob, yeah.
Right. Mob rule is very different to a one-on-one, someone who's looking for a bag to snatch or an easy target, right?
Yeah. And that comes back to this kind of, this martial spirit or this energy or this thing that you build. And that
as instructors, it's our job to instill above everything else awareness. You don't want to be in a fight and then have to resort to, oh no, I'm in a fight, and get to, because before you're in the fight, you're taken out of the fight. You know, we have to set up boundaries and perimeters, what's acceptable and what's not in our own self. You know, and I question everything. Why is that guy second looking at me? What's he looking at? Is he signaling someone else? Is there a bank robbery about to go? Am I in the middle of something I don't realize?
Yeah.
No? And then we also have to take into consideration strengths and liabilities. What are my strengths? What can I bring to this fight? Well, I can bring gratuitous violence. I can do that at any point, right? But we can bring that into a fight, right?
Yeah.
Vengeful, wrathful violence. Yeah. Oh, but yesterday I injured my hamstring. The options of me using that leg are now limited. Strengths and liabilities. Yeah. Am I with my family? Do I have children with me? Am I in a hostile environment? You know, all of these things. And this has all been given to me as well as martial arts, as Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and martial arts, but stuff I've learned through life experience, I bring into the field. I bring into that kind of dojo, and I set that out, set my table out very quickly. Yeah. That doesn't detract from Gracie Jiu-Jitsu being a wonderful fighting art, you know, or a complete system of self-defense. What it does is it adds to it. It was never taught to me by the Gracies, but it adds to it through what it does. It enables me to consider preemptive striking. Yeah. It enables me to make a tactical withdrawal or run away from a situation if I need. Or it also enables me to consider my strengths and liabilities and what do I have in my area? What, you know, what do I have so I'm walking in the street, have I clocked that there's a loose brick there, but there's a dustbin lid that may have to come into effect at some point. You know, one of the biggest self-defense things that I tell people is people now rely on their cell phone to tell them where they are. Look at every street sign you walk down. And then can you reverse that with footsteps should someone spray you with pepper spray in a street fight? You know, are you going to run out into the road, or do you recognize that, hey, that was 13 steps and I left there, you know? And people not thinking about that. And that's self-defense. They're not thinking about that awareness because we don't want to be in a fight. And if we are in a fight, they have an element over us. And the element is surprise. They already know what they're going to do. We are reacting.
Yeah, they've already pre-planned it, right?
They've left their house and they're going out to do whatever they're going to do. And we are kind of thinking like we're playing catch up. So we always want to get the drop on them as quick as we can. And listen, apart from bringing vengeful, wrathful violence to the, it's controlled because it's through martial arts. But I'm also thinking about standoff, my start point, are my hands in my pockets? If I'm not training with my hands coming out of my pockets, you know, then that's a problem because I'm going to be caught with my hands in my pockets. If I've got headphones in, you know, I don't hear things, you know. So all of this is going on in the background before we even engage in combat, right? Before we even engage in the fighting arts. And the one I always tell my students is, don't fight fair. Don't fight fair in a fight. Don't be confined to the dojo etiquette and the dojo walls of a bowing society. Because you're gonna come unstuck very quickly in a violent confrontation.
I mean, anybody that's kind of bringing a fight to you, for me, one of the big things in society is that most of us want to be law-abiding and stuff.
Absolutely.
And we have this this instant kind of it's a block that stops us reacting immediately to the threat of violence because we think, you know, we don't want to get involved, we don't want to get in trouble with the law. Yeah. And these people haven't got that. They're at the starting gate. The starting gate's gone. They're already racing.
They're at the start point, right? They're off from the gate, and we kind of play.
They're off, and you're still.
Yeah. And this is where the awareness of the whole thing comes in. When we package it comes into that being aware, consciously aware of everything around me and everyone. Yeah. And you know, in those situations, like you were saying, is super important that we understand that the dojo etiquette has to stop in the dojo. Because I don't want to gouge your eyes because we're friends and I really don't want to hurt you and I want to train with you for the rest of my life. But if we conform to this bowing culture and this bowing society, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but we have to be able to put that on the back burner. From my limited knowledge of Kung Fu, it's a fighting art. It's a fighting system, right? And my own, you know, I haven't researched too much, but my own understanding is someone who understands those concepts in its fighting stuff can seriously do damage, right? It doesn't matter what it is, whether it be Kung Fu, Krav Maga, whatever it is, as long as the teeth are in it. Right? And that's where we fall down. And that's that watered down component I'm talking about. That I go in the street, hey, I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt, and I take the guy on the ground with no consideration for weapons.
What happens next?
Or his friends, or innocent bystanders, right? Or this guy producing a weapon, and I go do a beautiful arm lock, extend the guy's arm, and he reaches in his pocket and stabs me with his knife. Right? The consideration in confrontation has to be primarily survival, not win or lose. How can I survive this situation? How can I get out? How can I listen? I may lose an ear, I may lose a nose or an eye, but I'm going to survive. There's no winners in that kind of conflict, right? What we're competing against is the surprise attack. We don't know what they're going to do. And there are many, many things that can happen. Oh, have you got the time? Oh, and whack, they hit you. Ask for directions. You know, there's a new one, not a new one, it's pretty old, that was happening with home invasions.
Yes.
When a beautiful young innocent looking woman would come to the house in a fluorescent jacket with a plastic card and knock on your door, you would open the door and say, can I help you? And she would say, I'm just doing a survey. And around the corner, there were 3, 4, 5 guys ready to run into the house, rape, pillage, rob, steal and kill, do whatever they want with life and liberty because of the disguise, that sheep, you know, that wolf in sheep's clothing. And martial arts or martial science must teach you these things. It must teach you to be prepared at all times, you know? And like I said, it sounds funny. And I don't walk around like paranoid looking, but I'm on a higher state of alert than I would be.
Heightened awareness rather than
any other time. And what do we have over them? Well, we have years of skill training, stuff that they're not able to commit to. They'll never come in and commit to years and years of training because it takes years and years. They will, you know, do whatever they do. And like I said, these are disgusting, you know, cockroaches that go out, and as soon as you turn the light on, they scurry into the darkness, but they will prey on the weak and vulnerable.
Yeah.
And all we can do is prepare for that moment.
Yeah.
We hope it never happens. Martial arts is like an insurance plan. You know, in your car, you crash your car. You hope it never happens, but you crash your car. When it happens, oh my God, it's okay. You're okay, I'm okay, and I'm insured.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? And martial arts is the same.
Yeah.
That it may never happen, but if it does happen, there's my insurance policy, and I'm about to cash in on it.
Yeah.
Whether we deliver a fatal elbow or something, right? That we cash in on our insurance at that time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
Right? And you know, I know Nishan's a lifelong martial artist, and from my time, we have these conversations, and Nish is like, yeah, if I'm here, could I gouge you? And I'm like, absolutely. If you're grappling with someone on the ground, I'm talking from a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu perspective, and you're not thinking about putting your elbow into their nose or gouging their eyes or headbutting them or biting their ear off, you know, then you shouldn't be grappling on the ground, because we're not grappling fair, right? It's not a fair fight anymore.
No,
right? Fair fight is left in the dojo. And we're all older, we're all senior students, and I'm a happy, smiley guy, but no one's going to get the drop on me. That's not going to happen. You know, and I think that is something that's a learned skill.
Yeah.
Some people naturally have it. Some people naturally over-aggressive.
Yeah.
And we can never lose compos mentis of our art and what we're doing, you know, and it's very, very vital for us as martial artists as well to instill that in the students.
Yeah, fantastic. From the talk of self-defense, can you talk about some of the main attacks that happen to unsuspecting people based on your years of experience with the police and what you've seen from students coming in saying, hey, listen, I want to learn self-defense because this happened? Or what are some of the main things you see, whether it's, you know, the sucker punch or even the knife?
Majority of I see violence have changed in the last 10, 15 years, and I'm sure you would agree with me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if knife crime has increased or if it's just the media publicizing that it's increased, okay? If you go back to the Teddy Boys and the Punks and those, they were always switchblades, you know, they would carry chains and this and that, and they were prearranged fights, and they would be innocent bystanders. But what we're seeing a lot of now is, with the increase in your Instagram and your social media, and, you know, people, youngsters are growing up in poverty-stricken areas, and what they're doing is they're looking at Instagram and seeing this make-believe life of people wearing £100,000 Rolexes and driving the most amazing cars, and they feel like they're disadvantaged, or their socioeconomic background, they're never going to have that. So the violence levels start to increase now. They go out and they actively hunt and search for those things. Because unlike in our time, I was brought up to go and work and earn, and I'm not saying they're not, I'm just saying that the choices that they make are very different now. Some of the most common ones we've had are people have gone up to people, threatened them with a knife and took their rucksack. People have gone up and sucker punched someone, and they're out of the fight before they know they're in the fight, and have had their Rolex taken. People have gone up to people and choked them out now with the explosion of the UFC, and that people are starting to learn this stuff.
Really?
Yeah, and strip them of their watches. It's happened. I can send you lots of clips. So the violence has changed. Violence has increased. People are more likely to use weapons now than just threaten you with weapons. We've seen this over and over. Thankfully, it's limited to groups though.
Right.
The people that come in I have students that have come in and have been riot. Someone recently who was on a train, and someone didn't like the way they were standing so close, just turned on them and said, "What are you looking at?" face to face. And the student said he froze to the spot. You cannot teach that, right? This is a learned skill. This takes
natural response. It's fight or
flight.
Fight or flight, but it's also freeze. People miss that bit.
For sure.
The actual natural responses are fight, flight, or freeze.
And that's a cognitive behavior.
Yeah.
That's a cognitive behavior, because there is a very big difference with gym fighters and street fighters and cage fighters and tournament fighters. I know some guys that are amazing in the gym. They go out to perform on a world class stage, and they melt, they fall apart. Can't get it together. Same in a street fight, you know, and it's very, very hard to just put the two together. And that's why we have to have the upper hand on these people all of the time. You know, where we go and where we position, what's the layout of the area. And this is all before we talk about confrontation. Before we even get to confrontation, what is our thing? Well, it's standoff.
Right.
You know, it's standoff, it's awareness, it's all of that stuff. And I'm not claiming to be a real self-defense guru. I'm talking about my years and years of experience in frontline policing, you know, coming up through the background that I have and you know, bringing that to the table before martial arts.
Right.
If you're street aware, you know the times that, you know, the areas where the guys hang out.
Yeah.
We all have them in our area, right? We
know which areas to go. You know what.
We know where to say.
Yeah.
We know we're not going to walk out wearing £100,000 watch.
It's just street smarts. And those street smarts.
Don't have that.
Yeah, and those street
People
smarts.
don't have that.
Yeah, you can. That's a concept that you can apply to. I mean, I've traveled to a lot of countries, and you know, those street smarts that you get from London.
Everywhere. It's a universal law.
It's a universal law. There are things you look out for. There are things you know. And
you know that little thing you get where you're like, was that? Yes, it was. Like,
yes.
Go with that instinct, right?
Yeah.
Go with that instinct.
Yeah. It's that thing you said, you're talking about, you know, you grew up in the East End. So did I, basically.
Right.
You know, my growing up was all in Hackney, in
the good East End,
Kingsmead Estate, which was
know it well.
Yeah, it was known as Devil's Island when I was growing up, you know. But what you learned, that street sense that you get from growing up in those environments, there's a lot of people that have grown up in much milder environments, and they don't really get it. And loads of people come from outside of the city, where it's more kind of like, maybe it's happening in lots of smaller towns now, but I think it has increased that level of street aggression. So there are people that are aware. You know, there's little things, like you said, that when you catch someone's eye, if they hold it a split second too long, because there's a natural thing, you catch someone's eye naturally and go, you walk past and their jaws go in, you know, they're chewing on.
Little things,
they're all signals, and I've seen, the thing is, you see the mugs, but they've got that aggression in them because they're brought up in that environment.
That's what I was saying about the levels of violence have changed, like the way it is has changed now. And because we have a metropolis, people traveling in from suburbs every day to work.
Yeah.
You know, and people see people in suits as weak.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when these people are at work. Yeah. What do they do on a Thursday night? Well, that's the big city night where they go out and get drunk. You know, so we know that. So if you think you're the only one, you're mistaken. They know that.
Yeah.
Right? They know that, and they prey on that, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Like being drunk on the train going home, and they stand at the train doors. As the train doors are closing, they snatch your iPhone or your phone or your bag, jump off the train, and they're away.
Yeah.
It's so many, violence has changed. The territory of violence has changed. And if you're not smart, if you don't understand it, then unfortunately you get eaten up by it, you know. I'll give you a quick example. In the police training school, when I joined the specialist teams like SO19 and the TSG groups, they gave us specific training. It was inadequate, still is inadequate, I believe. It's not adequate, okay? Which is why we have these atrocities that have been happening, because the training lets us down. And that's across the board, no matter what it is. In our individual professions, Nish in your profession, Alex in yours, if we wasn't trained right, it would show, we would be let down. At some point we get let down, right? Or it lets us down. They would say when you stop a vehicle, an arm stop, there's a certain protocol. I would add to that protocol. And what I would add to that protocol is I go up to the vehicle, I have a contact and cover officer, I'm armed, they're armed, we'd approach the vehicle, driver's hands are out the vehicle is switched off. I place my hand on the boot of the vehicle. I then walk around and deal with whatever it is. If I'm run down, shot, or anything happens, I can guarantee I'll stop that vehicle because my hands are on that vehicle. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's an idea of where it comes from me. That was my own perspective. Now, they adopted that as a technique now. That's been adopted when I worked with the LAPD and the NYC. guys, when we did job swaps, it's been adopted now. There are certain other things, you know, which will come out, I guess, at some point. Knee strikes and elbow strikes. There are all sorts of stuff that's gone in where we are seen as soft targets because most police officers are middle class background. It's very hard, you know, people, white collar people, we're manual laborers, we want to go out and we get the jobs due to our education. And so they have a real tough time, police. I've seen police recently getting beaten up and stuff. And it saddens me because they're not there. You know, you really rarely have a bad encounter with them unless you've done something wrong, you know. And the training, they'll fall at their training, you know. Yeah. And it's the same with our students. If we don't give them this level of training, if we don't give them this life, if we don't bring that into the training and make it fit and find its place, and all they know is let's go hands-on, let's react moment by moment as a situation unfolds, we're always on the back foot, we're losing. Yeah. And that's why we have common law, statute law of the preemptive strike and stuff like that. And I'm sure you guys are advocates of that. And if you're not, why not? No. Right? That's the question, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you feel that your life's at threat, then answer all the questions afterwards, but act accordingly.
Right. You know? It's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, right?
Yeah. True. This is what I was saying. A lot of the time, you know, people aren't wired to get straight into that fight. No matter how long you've been training and what you're doing, we're not wired to get straight into it. But the predator is.
Absolutely.
He's out the starting gate before you're ready to react or whatever, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, they always get the drop on us. You know, because they have the element of surprise.
Yeah.
They already know what they're going to do. And they shut down, and even subconsciously, you know, neurologically, they don't know, but they are shutting down what we are meant to do.
Yeah.
Because the ultimate art of fighting is, if you notice, a lot of robberies is they're very close in the face with a knife in the gut.
Yeah.
They're very close, and people can't deal with this closeness.
Yeah. It's already bridged your personal space.
They've already gone through what we call standoff, right?
Yeah.
And then they come into that space like with rapes. And they put their hand over and they say, don't scream, I have a gun, I'll kill you, or I'll stab you, come with me. Now, at that moment, if you're caught unawares like that, the moment you get placed into a vehicle or walk to another part of an area, that is when that fight for your life comes. And there's a difference with fighting for your life, you know, and I always say this, you know, I use the home invasion kind of mindset. Because if someone invades my home, I'm no longer fighting in a country for your territory. I'm now fighting for my own.
Yeah.
So whatever's coming through that house, I'm actively going to hunt it.
Chop into pieces.
Right. Street confrontation. But we have to take these components into place and look at strengths and liabilities, awareness, getting the drop on these people, being first, whether it's tactical withdrawal, making our presence felt. That's a big thing. You know? If you kind of like this,
raising the spirit, innit? Yeah.
Of course it is. You know, and to whatever martial art you do, you know, I have the utmost respect for all martial artists. You know, any dedicated student, because it is dedication. It does. But these are the components that people don't think about. They don't get. They think that they're going to give someone a quick 1-2 and it's over.
No.
And sometimes you can give people, you know, a quick 1-2 and they'll eat those shots and say, that's the way I like it. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
They give you that smile, yeah?
Yeah, and then what?
That's a nightmare, isn't it? It's like, oh, no.
Of course.
We've got a comment from Tony Willis. It says, hello, great discussion. He said, Ed, stop telling everyone all this awareness of prevention stuff you were discussing. It's the whole foundation of my courses and workshop.
If Tony can hear, you know, a lot of people are unaware of my background and actually what I do. But I've served not only here, I've served as an operator in hostile countries, as a firearms consultant, as an active operator. So they have a very bad stigma attached to them. But a lot of my stuff has been from looking after certain people and extracting certain people from certain places, as well as being a Metropolitan Police SO19 firearms officer on their specialist operation. So I'm bringing a lot of that to the fight. You know, I bring a lot of that to the fight, and you know, I'm not advocating violence in any way, shape, or form. What I'm advocating is self-preservation. It all starts with having that belief that you have the right to defend yourself, that your life is worth defending. When weapons are involved, totally different scenario.
Yeah.
Completely different scenario. You know?
Ed, what are some of the legal ramifications of being in a confrontation from the UK perspective and from the perspective of the police? So given, I know the first thing that's always brought up, if let's say I get into a confrontation on the street and I do what I have to do to protect myself, protect my life, being a martial artist doesn't work well for me, does it?
Listen, everything is justification.
Right.
Okay. Everything is justification. There's this thing called an honest held belief in law. Now, if me and you guys were out, we were, I don't know, in a restaurant, and someone came up to Alex, God forbid, and started on Alex, and I punched the guy, I'm going to jail, okay? Because I cannot fear for another person's safety.
Can you not? I thought you could use self-defense to
big misconception. Self-defense is in those two words, self and defense, right? Self is me, not my company.
I thought it covered property and other people.
Property is covered by a different legislation.
Right.
Okay, but it doesn't, right? Because let's say I'm afraid of dogs, but you're not. And a big old German Shepherd comes up, barking its mouth off, and I freak out, but you're like, hey, it's cool that you pet the dog. Okay, I can't say you're at the same fear level as I am, because we're different. Okay, so you cannot defend someone else like that. That cannot happen. Okay,
right.
That's a common misconception. Now, if someone confronted me and I had an honest held belief that that individual was going to cause me serious harm, death or worse, then I could defend myself with what is reasonable, deemed what is reasonable. Now, what is reasonable would not mean me picking him up, pile driving him into the floor, doing the river dance on him, hitting him with a bar stool, dragging him outside, and then running him over with a car. Not reasonable, okay? It sounds a little excessive.
Sometimes.
Oh, it's sad, right? It sounds a little excessive. Right? It sounds a little excessive. However, if I had an honest held belief that I was in threat of imminent, and that's the key word here, imminent danger, imminent and immediate danger, then I could do what I had to do to defend myself. I would still have to justify that in a court of law.
That's the key, isn't it? Yeah.
And that's the key, justification.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I was involved in an arrest one time. I took out an asp and I hit the guy with the asp.
That's a baton. Telescopic baton.
Metal. Now, during when I struck him, it hit him in the head and the thing bent. I couldn't rack it. I couldn't shut it away. I used it as an exhibit. When we went to court, the defense said to me, officer, how hard did you hit my client? That's the question. And I replied, as hard as I could.
Yeah.
Right. That was how much the threat was.
Right.
I struck him as hard as I could. Because had I had said, oh, I hit him at 10%, they would say to me then, well, what is 10% to you and to him? And then it would fall down. I'd get, the Met would get sued. It would be horrendous. Now, I didn't intend the baton to hit him in the head. The deflection that he took, the angle that he took, he got struck with. And that was all taken into consideration. So we have to be very, very careful, There are also laws that enable the citizen, people like us, because I'm retired now, so the citizen, that we can defend life, limb, and property, which are common law. Okay,
right.
So we have to be very careful. So no, I could not punch someone in the face who was threatening you. No, I couldn't do that.
I'll bear that in mind when I'm out with my mates.
Right, but you could.
Yeah, I'll do it for myself.
You could do it yourself as a preemptive strike, right?
Yeah.
So as a preemptive strike, you could do that because you were in fear of violence.
Yeah, the justification has to be
right.
there.
And again, it's all justified, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that we have to take into account is someone punches me in the face, runs off, climbs down a riverbank, swims across the river, climbs up the other side and runs away. I give chase, climb down, swim across, run after them, catch them, give them the spinning back elbow, grind them into dust because they punch me in the face. Guess what's going to happen to me?
You're going to get nicked.
I'm going to get nicked. Well and truly nicked. You know why?
No immediate threat, was
right. The threat is now leaving the scene.
Yeah.
The same as if he punched me in the mouth, ran off, and I see him the next day on the bus, and then I assault him. Nope, no can do. Right. So that also is really important. People mistake that, and that's when that red mist comes down, and we go, okay, I got this. I've been practicing my Kung Fu for 10 years or my Jiu-Jitsu. I'm going to go practice on that guy now. I'm going to go put it to the test. No. Threat has now ceased. Yeah. Same as when you're ejecting something. You may have a disgruntled student in your academy or someone who walks in, you eject them using which force is reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And proportionate. That's the other one. Reasonable and proportionate. Now, imagine someone smaller than you, like a little old man or a little old lady, and you took him outside, or you was trying to get him out, and you started fighting, and you picked him up, hit through him, you know, knee dropped on him, strangled him, dragged him out by his legs. That's not going to go well for you.
It's not, is it?
That still might not go well for you if he's a huge guy, right? You may give him a iron slap, whack. He takes that, you knock him out. You're then duty bound, and you have a duty of care now. Crazy. The law works crazy, right?
Yeah.
However, let me give you a quick scenario. Mr. Miggins, he's 80 years old. You're out having a good time, and Mr. Miggins goes crazy, starts throwing punches at you, you know, whatever, starts hitting you, takes his walking stick, starts hitting you. Where's your justifications? Right there, right, to do whatever. What do you do to that guy? If all you know is punch and kick back, you're going to jail. Right? If you can restrain and control him, no matter what Mr. Miggins does, if you can control him, you know, and stop that happening, that's going to be far better than your ego getting the better of you because he cracked you over the head with a walking stick and you jaw the guy and kill the guy, right? Yeah, the manslaughter happened to so many people.
But let's say that as a trained martial artist, and it's purely self-defense, that I get into a scrap with someone that is untrained, right? And it's clearly his fault, right? Clearly his fault, and I'm defending myself. And then nowadays with CCTV, with,
you know, I always talk about that
with people that with witnesses and different stories. In terms of the law, what are they looking at, and what are they taking into account, and what as a martial artist should you? Because
Nish, are you asking me how do you assault someone and get off with it?
I'm asking you how, because I remember you saying this to me before. I was saying as martial artists, when it comes to the law, they'll throw everything they can at you, and the fact that you're a martial artist, you should.
So let's put this into, because there's some really good points there, Nish.
Yeah.
And you know, like I said, I'm retired and I keep up to date on the law. Your first point as a martial artist. Well, what is martial arts? This is what the defense was. What does martial arts mean?
Yeah.
Discipline.
Right.
Discipline, right? Thick-skinned. Just like police officers are expected to be spat at, pushed around and not react, right? They don't take into consideration bad days in the office. We all have them, we're all human. So the first thing they're going to look at is your martial arts, you're skilled. Now, case people out there don't realize, most people get arrested these days because they implicate themselves. They go on Instagram and they put them doing a spinning kick. They put that they're a black belt in this and a black belt in that, and they're, you know, sparring with guys. And so when they go to court, the defense will Google you 100%.
Yep.
And all that will come up. There will be a picture of you in your Kung Fu outfit, right, or whatever it is, your Jiu-Jitsu gi, doing some move. And they will portray you to because remember, their job is to get their guy off or their girl off.
That's right, yeah.
So they will portray you as that guy. as this mad killer, right? This trained, even if you took one lesson. Right? So that's what they'll do, right? The next is CCTV. CCTV is a clip or a fragment. They won't show the whole thing. They will show that little clip of violence. We see it on Instagram, a little clip of violence. We don't see the whole build up to it. We see someone getting knocked out, right? Then the eyewitnesses that you have, if me, you, and Alex watch something, we would all see something different from vantage points.
Exactly.
You're right. So all of our statements would be different, would be totally different. Which is why when I was in the Met, I would tell people, whenever I'd arrest them and it would get into some sort of scrap, the first thing I would say to them is stop resisting, very loudly. Calm down, stop resisting. Why? Because public's perception is, what did that officer say? He said, oh, I heard him clearly say stop resisting. Clearly, right?
Right.
As well as that, that's a trigger for me to breathe. I don't want to hold my breath and get into it. So I'm breathing, I'm talking to the person all the time, and I'm getting feedback. Now, if he says I'm not resisting, then I'll say, great, I have some form of compliance, and I'll use the compliance. Put your hand out to the side. I'll ask for compliance. Now, sometimes that compliance might need a pressure point push or something to gain compliance. Those compliance techniques are very different.
Yeah.
So then going back to your thing about, you know, and I do this and I do that. Then you go to court and suddenly the defense shows up and says, oh, Nishan, yeah, tell me about yourself. Now, we love to talk about ourselves. Love it. You know, if someone asks you, we love it. Yeah. So in interview, oh, so you're a martial, you know, they find you, your jacket with your little badge on it, and oh, you're a martial artist, right? Oh, yeah, I'll do martial arts too. They draw you into a conversation. Oh, yeah, and what do you, oh, I train with this UFC guy. Suddenly, you're a cage fighter by association.
I've never seen one martial arts tagged villain that wasn't an expert.
Right.
There's not
Alex,
one.
What you're saying there is absolutely right.
Yeah.
We are trained killers from the
fanatics.
Time, right, from the time we walk in. This video that you're doing on Facebook and you're putting out, you're a trained killer, whether you are or not.
Yeah. No, I am.
All the newbies that come in, and they're so proud to be. They take a picture of everyone, and they've got their little white belt on or whatever. They don't know about belts. You're a trained killer.
Yeah.
You're trained more than Joe Public. So discipline. You know, I always say martial arts is a discipline. You know, martial arts is having a thick skin. Martial arts is control. Yeah. That's what we stand for, right? We stand for control and discipline and attitude and indomitable spirit and all the rest of that. Indomitable spirit. But ultimately, what are we training to do? We're training to handle serious business if it happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. In the most effective and efficient way.
Yeah.
Whether that's punching in the throat, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I always remember from your classes was the perception of the public and how you're seen through CCTV, and the difference between you physically how you're seen. So the difference between being like this and giving them something. So you're like this. That's already seen as aggressive. So from a law perspective, you're how are you a martial artist when you're and the difference between saying
forward rather than moving back.
Yeah,
right?
forward. So the difference between saying, "Hey, calm down," still being defensive, hands up, hey, blah, and how it looks on camera is different to this being.
And remember, you know, we always talk about this, and I discuss this a lot. If I get in conflict, majority of the time is we want to tense up and we want to do this. This is natural. If aggression is coming forward and I'm open-handed and I'm moving back, and most of you know that this is good head covering and good flinching and all the rest of it, but it also to the public looks very, looks very defensive. Like,
and also to the other person, it's defensive. It's not aggressive. So
diffusing.
If you're having an argument with someone and they're overly aggressive and they're coming into your space and you've got your hands out and you're saying no, look, I don't, whatever, you're not firing them up. If you went like, if you put your fists up, it's off.
Of course, straight away, Alex, 100% right.
Yeah, you've got
the only thing I would say with the open palms is that when people walk into them, they immediately want to smack them out the way. They immediately are like,
Yeah.
So there are many different things, but that is a good opportunity for a preemptive strike. If someone's walking in and they're touching you.
Yeah. As soon as they've walked into, I've got my mindset is that and hopefully if ever I need it, it will work. But if they come in, if they're really aggressive, you've got your personal private zone. Of course. And that grows the more aggressive someone is. So by the time they reach what you deem is, you know, a danger point, you're good to go, really. And you have to throw that switch. Yeah. And then go, because you've made that decision. You can't half-heartedly do it.
Sure. And that's that learned skill we were talking about.
Yeah.
It's a learned skill.
I've come to that through, I suppose, my years of training as well.
Right, yeah. Absolutely. And your years and years of training, like Nishan's and Tony, if Tony's still here, our years and years of training not only teach us to yield, because we're comfortable with what we can do, and we're confident, right, that we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But if we have to, we will, right? And as cliche and mystical as it sounds, it's not meant to.
Yeah.
I always say, well, why am I training? And I said to you before, it's an insurance policy. I hope I never have to cash in on it.
Yeah, I mean, I say things like, I say choose your battles, and I'm talking about more of a, with the awareness thing of when you might need to get out of this space, because, you know, there's a group of leery guys over there. They've been looking over too much. Don't be there.
Yeah, exactly.
So get out, because
100%.
You know, in the real situation that we're talking about, you don't have a choice. The choice has been removed because your aggressors come to you. So that's what we're working on, really.
Sure, and it's going to go two ways. It's going to go with you getting a serious pasting if you get caught off guard. You pasting someone else, then having to justify that and potentially gripping the rail at that court, and ending up with a criminal record, which could in turn affect your job and your career aspect.
Yeah.
So we're aware of that, and that unfortunately is what they have over us. They don't have those.
Yeah, they don't.
When we go back to socio-economic kind of upbringing, they don't care.
They don't care, and that's the big thing.
Nothing to
There's
lose.
nothing holding it back.
Right. You know, and then we have other ramifications. Oh, if we go to jail, what about our mortgage? What about our family? So that pause, that hesitation. There's a very old guy that I work with who retired long before I did, told me, there's no hesitation in war. There's no hesitation in conflict. Trust the training will kick in. Yeah. If you don't have a plan, then you plan to fail. You know,
right.
And that's a big thing. And so when these self-defense gurus come out, and that's what I call them, the rise of the Peter Pans, you know, that's what I label them as, because they're like boys who've never grown up. You know, they've never grown up, and they go through life believing that they're these gurus of self-defense, you know, and they've never had a paper cut in their life. And now I'm not saying that you can't be good at what you do, and I'm removing that. But what I am saying is there are very few and far between guys and girls that are legitimate. I'm friends with Jeff Thompson and those guys, and you know, Peter Constantine and all these guys with the old, like our era of reality-based combat.
Yeah.
But then what you've got is 30 seconds of insanity, and that 30 seconds of insanity. Then what? What if the guy's fitter? What if they're more aggressive? What if they can take what you're dishing out? It falls apart then. You know, and all those things, like, just go nuts for 30 seconds. Okay, but then what? What if I turn into this whirling dervish, screaming and exerting all this energy, and then after that, hands on the hips, and I'm blowing and you know, and this is the martial science, and I'm not discrediting that in any way, shape, or form, and that has its place. It does. It definitely has its place. But those factors that we spoke about early on, you know, the awareness, the mindset, the self-defense, the standoff, the getting the drop, the start points, all of that plays a massive part before we even go hands-on. If we can neutralize it and negate it at that point, and I do that in all aspects of my life. Anyone who knows me, who's been to my house, who knows how I am, Nish, I'm sure you can vouch for it. I'm like it all of the time, you know, the way I position my car, how I park, where I am, knowing everything about what I do and where I am. Almost like a geofence, you know.
Yeah.
And it's become second nature now. And that's not just through the UK. That's, you know, working in very hostile environments abroad, you know. So, you know, it's very, very important, I think, for us as teachers to give this to our students, apart from just the technical aspect as well.
I think a big element as well is the psychological aspect prior to conflict. There's a great area there for de-escalation and for fronting. You know, you've got kind of like frilled lizards. Yeah, and they'll kind of put on that. Do it, because even if you can't match up to it, that might stop the thing. If you kind of posture up, it depends, and you have to choose, because sometimes I've seen and I've been involved in situations where you try to apologize, you try to think, and they just get stronger. You know, there's a couple of them, they get stronger.
They see it as a weakness as well.
Yeah, they view it as weakness.
Seen as a weakness, yeah. So where's that balance? It's very,
very important.
Then you have to make a decision, and then either front it, and I did it and watch them melt back down, because they thought.
But you know what, Alex? With what you're saying and what Nish was just saying is absolutely right. If you look at, why do we pick the biggest guys to be on the door?
It's intimidation, isn't it?
Of course it is. It's the factor of, it's that psyche of, look, big and muscly. Oh, I wouldn't want to take a right hand off of him. But that was dismayed in the UFC, the early UFCs, by Royce. How big? Now remember, when we talk about the UFC, and we're not talking about aesthetically, what looks aesthetically right. Because I know some people that are out of shape.
Yeah.
That former football hooligans that can have a rock.
Yeah.
No martial arts training.
Yeah, they're actually much fitter than you'd give them credit for.
Yeah, and listen, they go and drink their 20 pints, eat their hamburger. They can have a rock. Let's make no doubts about it. Yeah. And people know exactly. They turn up and people go, oh, okay. And I know these people, right? And you know, then you look at people like, I don't know if you know who Mark Potter is, the boxer.
Yeah.
You know, you look at this guy. This guy is a menacing monster. You look at him, and if he came out of the car, it's a wrap, you know. It's going to be a rough night in the office, you know, because the guy looks like a shark. He's just, you know, he has that look. Now, aesthetically, most of these guys were like that when I was growing up as doorman. If you look at now the door supervisors, they're based a lot more like you and I, Nish and Alex. Your regular type looking guy, smiley faced, because they're trained under the SIA.
Yeah.
And what is all their whole thing is de-escalation.
Yeah.
They're being very nice to people until it's time to not be nice to people. And then what do? They have numbers.
Yeah.
It's no longer the face of the local area who's on the door. Now they have numbers. So you could be the biggest, toughest guys, and they'll do the door supervisor all pile-on technique, when 30 of them will just jump on you and eject you, right? So it's changed. The ramification has changed, and the playing field has moved. But with that said, if you go back to the early UFCs, this is again plays back into my hands a little bit. They were fighting very differently. If you look at Royce didn't ground grapple people. What did he do? He went in, pushed them into the fence, headbutts, knees, punches. First of all, using that Pizarro stump kick, clinched, struck them in the clinch, took them to the ground, struck them some more. Realized most people couldn't escape and would turn over and choke them out. That was the state of play, even with most of the grapplers. Now, back then, people weren't aware of grappling, and of course that was put together to demonstrate the credibility of the art. And there was some amazing fighters in there. Jason DeLucia, Kung Fu guy. People didn't realize that he was actually a student of the Gracies as well as Kung Fu. He was a visionary, that guy. He went into the academy on a Saturday and challenged them, lost the fight, came back and started learning, and then fought Royce again, UFC.
Yeah.
People didn't realize that, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you go back there, we were talking 5 fights in one night. That's what Royce did. 5 fights, one night. No rules, literally. There was a gentleman's agreement for no eye gouging. I saw Royce punching people in the groin, legally, right? So all of these low blows, and people were a little bit confused about that. There was no weight class.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
No gloves. No referee stoppage. Knockout or submission. So now when these MMA guys, and I train with a lot of them, run around saying, it's a real fight. No, it isn't. It's not a real fight. There are rules and regulations.
Yeah.
Gloves. Now, I'm not taking away that those guys could be very efficient. And
they'd be dangerous in a real situation.
Because they would have that same mind. Now, there's a certain type of person that goes and does that.
Yeah.
Right? They are martial artists. Yes, they are.
Yeah.
And now it's become, if you look at people like GSP, he was a scientist. Conor McGregor, they're scientists.
Yeah.
You know, If you look at Dan Hardy, who's part of my training team, you know, part of our coaching team, there's a scientist, you know, like Dan's part of our coaching team. There's a science there. So it's changed from back then. It's still the same. It has evolved. Now, if you go back a little further to Pride, when they would stamp on the head and jump on the head and, you know, all of this stuff, you see how it's evolved. And it was evolve or perish. But what that's done, I believe, for us as martial artists, is it's given us credibility now.
Yeah.
Even whether it's Kung Fu or Karate, we're finding purists. Lyoto Machida, a karate guy.
Yeah.
Right? So there are purists within these, and this is what I always try and explain to these MMA fighters. I don't know what MMA is personally. I've never heard of that. Okay, it's a generic name given to it, like kickboxing with Thai boxing. It's a diluted version of Vale Tudo, which means no rules.
Yeah.
When it originally came out from Vale Tudo, it was called No Holds Barred, or NHB.
NHB, yeah.
Right. It was never called MMA. It was just a generic thing that they put together, right? If you go back into Brazil before the UFC, they were fighting bare knuckles and fists. Now, if you go back even further to Pancration, what were they doing? It's an original form of MMA.
Yeah, totally. Everything.
And I'm pretty sure in Kung Fu days, they would have these challenge matches to the death. I'm sure it happened.
Yeah.
You know, and people who say anything different, they're talking nonsense, you know? So we can't claim that. The Gracies can make certain claims. And remember, I'm a black belt. I advocate Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. But the claims that we make, like people making the claims, Elio is the founder. I understand why they do that. I don't know if that's correct. He's definitely the Einstein. He's definitely changed it. And he's definitely twisted what it was, right? Definitely put the twist into it and gone into a much deeper root of it. But those kind of fights have been around from the dawn of time. We can go
absolutely, yeah.
You know, we can go right back, you know.
Yeah. And they all, and in terms of martial arts and martial arts, the 5 key things that you line out, they're part of that. Like,
well, if you look, I mean, you guys know more than me, but I have a book called The Tale of JKD.
Yeah.
And in that book, Bruce Lee has grappling. There's, you know, I know he called it JKD, but I'm aware he came from a traditional background. But in that book that evolved JKD thing, there's ground fighting. I'm not sure if you guys have that in what you do, if there was any kind of ground fighting, but I'm sure in its original entirety there would have been, because of the age that it grew up in.
Yeah.
And whether that was ground fighting with weapons or whatever it was, you know, because martial arts was fighting to the death, right? Fighting to kill. It was literally that, you know. Now it's become martial science, where it's not the best martial artists winning anymore. It's the most scientific fighters.
Yeah.
I can remember watching, remember Rocky when he fought Ivan Drago?
Yeah.
And Drago was on all this machinery running, and he's doing nothing different than Conor McGregor's doing right now. Than the UFC training center, right? They're taking super athletes. Now it's athletes versus athletes, not martial arts versus martial arts.
Nutrition, best training methods, and all the rest of it.
The most efficient factors. How do we make that? How do we generate that much power over this per square inch?
Yeah.
You know? And now we have the tools to measure that.
Yeah.
Right. And that is super important, whether they're doing it through nutrition, whether they're doing it through diet, whether they're doing it through science, you know, pure science. Whereas when we were growing up, it was never, you ready, you go and have 6 weeks training camp, you 12 weeks training camp. No, it was on the spot, just ignites. And that's what we have to think about when we're talking about self-defense. That it's an ignition on the spot, right there and then, and how we deal with it, how that transmits and how we translate to that.
Yeah.
There's a question from Tony Willis. It says, question for Professor Kone. Pure self-interest, but how do old guys train in something like jiu-jitsu? Something he's always asked, and normally from people much younger than me, but it still holds true. And it was a question that I was going to ask as well about the age of people coming to train with you. What age range do you teach people?
So my oldest student on the mat is 67 years old. I want to be able to do this right into my later, I want to retire and my later years and still be able to go on the mat. And that's the beauty of whether it's form, kata, or self-defense. The self-defense is what's going to be able, when the old man's later life, he would focus solely on and preliminary on the self-defense aspects, from surprise attacks, so grabbing, this and that. Because he wasn't astute to go on the ground and arm lock people and roll around, but he could still reap the benefits of self-defense. So those initial forms of self-defense. As a younger person, we look at life very differently. We heal quicker, we train harder, we kind of more enthusiastic. For the older student, now I fall into that bracket too, we have to treat our body a little differently. We have to, like Alex was saying, we have to pick the battles very carefully. I don't battle anyone anymore. I'm training to teach, not training to tap. So I'm not going on the mat to tap people. I'm going on to sweat, to move around, to help people involve, and to keep myself sharp.
It's a maintenance kind of thing.
Maintenance is massive. Don't get me wrong. When Nish comes to the academy, me and him battle sometimes.
Yeah.
Very similar, and we enjoy that back and forward. Very similar styles and similar in technique. And we can kind of negate a lot. And we're aware of what each other's trying to do, and we're respectful of each other's body. That's the other thing.
Yeah, I think that's important when you're doing week in, week out. Otherwise,
you cannot do that. That's crazy. No.
You just damage yourself and then miss like weeks of training.
And then you wonder why you don't have improvement, right?
Yeah.
Because you go in one hard battle, off the mat for a week, go back another battle. Meanwhile, that young guy has been training 6-7 days in a row.
Yeah.
Right. So there are times I have very specific people. Nish is one of them that I can not push hard with, but I know he's going to give me a workout and I'm going to give him a workout, and we're going to sweat a little, and then we're going to sit down, we're going to have a chat, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. But the idea is maintenance. Now, whenever I train, you will never see me tape up any of my fingers or my toes. Right, Nish? I don't do that. And I've been doing this a long time because I treat my body right,
Right.
There are people that I know now, my age, which cannot train anymore. And they're depressed. And that depression then turns to anger. And that anger then turns to drink or whatever. And then they're frustrated with their family. And and that's not what martial arts is.
No.
It's a lifelong journey,
For me, again, no matter how hard you should train to live. People quite often you find they live to train and it's short-lived.
Right, for sure. And don't get me wrong, I know Tony as well. Tony trains with us.
Yeah.
He's a wonderful guy, great exponent and a great, advocate of martial arts. And Tony's come from a time when martial arts was hard, when it was shin on shin. Bone on bone.
Yeah.
And he's gone through the mill, and there's a lot of guys out there that are like that, and there's nothing wrong with that because that's the evolution. We're now in times where we can't train with another human. We're forced to train with dummies.
Yeah.
You guys are very fortunate because I'm not sure if you use, but you have the wooden dummies.
So we don't.
Oh, right, okay. But I'm saying like the Kung Fu kind of people.
Wing Chun thing.
Yeah. Wing Chun, those guys are very fortunate. They can put out 20 dummies and practice their forms, right? Not be in contact. Yeah. We're fortunate we have grappling dummies. And I think it's not what you can do with the dummies, but it's how the instructor can translate that information to those dummies and make the class.
Oh, I mean, it's like you say, it's the evolution. Now we're forced to, when we haven't got that personal contact, you have to be innovative and you find other things to work with. And there are many, many old traditional tools that people have used for centuries before us. We can go back to them, but the fact we haven't maybe used them because we've not needed to, or they're there. So explore them.
Sure. But that's what you and people like Tony and Nish, you guys bring to the table, and you guys have that knowledge, and that's that knowledge I'm talking about. If you enter a martial art now, say I popped up and I don't know what style you guys do, but if I popped up and said, right, I'm doing that style and it's modern style, and I labeled it as something else, and I took away, remember what I'm talking about? It's history, lineage. And just now I'm standing here scratching my head saying, well, how do I, because I don't know anymore. Now that might not be my fault. It might be I've never been taught.
I mean, that does happen. That does happen with our style, with all styles, really.
Right. And I've seen Nish doing some stuff with like heavy bats, heavy weights, ring, all of this stuff forms in his garage, and people don't know that stuff. And that's what we're here to do. And that's that preservation. That's that preserving of it.
Do you have any forms, katas, or anything like that within the jiu-jitsu stuff that you train as a pattern?
We do actually. We do. Yeah, people self-defense circle, right?
There you go. Right, yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I consider us as Gracie Jiu-Jitsu to be a traditional martial art.
Yes.
We're not. It's not modern anymore. The modern style of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is the sportive element. I consider Gracie Jiu-Jitsu as the traditional martial art now of Jiu-Jitsu. So when people refer to us, which is why I said in the beginning, we can live in all worlds, but they can't live in all of our world. They all can't live in our world.
Yeah.
You know, so I consider us and would list us as traditional Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and traditional, and people use this term, they say real Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or this and that, but no, it's traditional or authentic, because our lineage can be traced, our teachings can be traced, the way we teach can be traced, how we teach can be traced, right back to the master text and beyond, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's so important for people to really understand that, and the same with what you guys do. And just while we're quickly talking on self-defense, Nish advocates this. I don't know if you realize he does this. The health defense, looking after your body. Remember, I called you recently about goji berries and stuff.
Yeah.
Right. This is health defense.
Totally.
Self-defense is health defense, right? So whether I'm training on the mat and training for health defense, I don't want to get injured. I want to be able to be on the mat a lot longer.
Yeah.
Or whether I'm looking after my body through nutrition or through letting bad thoughts penetrate, circulate and manifest and outwardly portraying that. All of that is self-defense. We're just talking about another form of self-defense, right? A holistic approach to self-defense.
Mind, body, spirit.
Right, exactly that, Alex. Whether it's the yin and yang, whatever you can align that to.
Yeah.
Now, it would be easy for me to come on and chuck it around and say I've done that. I'm not into that. Them glory stories, and that doesn't impress me, right? It's about understanding from a grassroots level what martial arts is to me, sharing what it is with you, hearing what you are, what you guys portray and what you guys are, and seeing our common ground, not our differences, because our differences are open for conversation.
Yeah.
But our common ground is what binds us.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
One wholly as martial artists.
100%.
No matter what the art is.
Yeah.
Yat ga, as they say in Cantonese, like it's one family.
Right. We use the term one flag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, one representation of martial artists.
Yeah.
Me as a martial artist, if I go out and hurt someone and it's publicized, guess that hurts the whole of martial arts. Not just my art, it hurts everything.
Yeah.
You know, what stance I take affects everything, you know. And I think we're all advocating it, but we never, you know, I'm someone who watches and learns. And I can remember Tony Willis banging himself one time in our academy, or hurting himself. And then he told me about something he made and put on it, some
medicine,
like herbal medicine. But again, health defense.
Yeah.
If we can take people apart, we need to be able to put them back together, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. And that's that martial side is what it is. And the art form, yes, it's an art, not to be mistaken for, although it's a creative art, if you look at capoeira and you know, certain other arts. And that's why I refer to it as a science, martial science, because the science behind it is you, I, all of us here, anyone watching, martial arts, but the science of that martial spirit is so important. Self-defense, you know, the common denominator is our common ground. And then what we don't have in common, well, can we find common ground? Does it work in those areas? Because that's open for conversation. We can't shut out that conversation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the creative part, I think, is interpretation and how your body works and how you can, you know, that's the art kind of side.
Well, if you guys, you know, from that form of art form, when you have the acupuncture and the cupping and the tuinar and all of that, I go see Nish's brother if I'm injured, you know, and the acupuncture is thousands of years, but all of the jiu-jitsu guys use it.
Yeah.
Right? Agreed, right?
Yeah.
The cupping, the osteopathic manipulations.
So important.
Right. So it can all be, it's osteopaths are martial artists. They just don't know it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing something like
martial art
about Kalari, you know, the Kalari player, Indian martial art, one of them.
right?
And you know, people that got into that, they
My connection's dropped.
because it's the foundation is the human body, the human spirit, the human intelligence for the art and the science part. That's the basis for which we do any of these arts.
For sure. And a lot of people, you know, when they hear Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or Jiu-Jitsu, they think someone arrogant is going to come on and blah, blah, blah.
No, it's great. It's great having on and explain, because I've just learned so much already. But it's like, you know, your training regime and the curriculum and stuff like that, and the fact that your perspective, where you're coming from, it's a martial art.
Right.
You know, you explained that quite well.
I want to go back to something you said as well, Alex, when you said, you know, do you have katas or forms? One of the things that Ed shows whenever he teaches a range of techniques with the core principles and things to think about for any of the techniques, whether it's stand up to clinching or to a throw to actually performing a lock or a choke, is he'll perform it, showing it with someone, with a partner, but then on his own, he's like, watch what I'm doing. And it's the preset arranged movements. What is that? That's a kata. That's a form,
isn't it?
That's a mini form. So, and when you have, and every time when Ed moves and he's showing it, he's saying, think about this, think about that, think about that. And that's what we do in traditional martial arts.
Totally, so that's a blueprint for that technique.
It's a blueprint. So, and Ed is a big thing. If you can't do it on your own or solo, and you haven't drilled it and you haven't practiced it, then can you redo it on someone else? Because you have to practice. And then whether or not it's a live person or a dummy, and with kind of COVID coming up, all of these things that Ed has taught or has come from Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, they're becoming more prevalent now. And that's from way back, you know? So there are certain places that don't have that or haven't got that background. So, and that teaching carries over into the students. And, you know, so even when I'm drilling all of these things, I'm like, okay, I'm doing this. My knee's going here because of this. Okay, I need to have my hand here because of this, you know?
There's been times when you've said, Nish, oh, I could employ this in like a striking thing with whatever you were doing, or and that's the whole thing behind it, you know, sharing and learning and being an open book and not being closed-minded and saying, oh, I know everything.
Yeah, and there's so much crossover, because as we said, you know, there's only certain ways to move, and this one movement, like Ed, we have a technique that comes up like this. Yeah, however you look at it, guillotine.
Yeah, totally.
It's a guillotine. It's a guillotine, but
of course,
being able to see it from another art, understand the principles, understand those concepts. I've said, well, actually, this movement for me now is a guillotine. I can take that and use it as a guillotine and as a choke. And then with the added knowledge that comes from jiu-jitsu, I've been able to say, this is how it can be applied for us. And it's
that rising motion that you're using for the guillotine.
Yeah.
If someone, you know, if someone's in such close quarters and you put a frame in to stop them, you know, whether that is a frame or a strike or whatever it is, if they're that close, then there's nothing wrong with you shoving the head and turning it into a guillotine.
Exactly.
And that's how it has to translate. That's that universal knowledge that we call martial arts.
Exactly. And just to show you how close things are, what you have as a frame is we have as a technique. So the frame, right? This frame here.
Yeah, the frame there.
This one, right?
Yeah.
Even this, you know.
This technique is from our system as well. Right. So when you did that, I was like, hey, that comes from here. Yeah. And then the movement from the frame to the guillotine, it's the same. It's just understanding that concept and then applying it. So you showed something, I was like, oh my God, it was always there. I just didn't see it.
In that context.
In that context. Now I understand that context. It's the same. I can take that application, that's come from jiu-jitsu and apply it to the system. Same thing. And it's still, and as you said, we have the same things, but they're so similar. Like I can take these opinions of.
If you go back to man, you know, someone somewhere sat down and said, I wonder what would happen if I put your head in here and squeeze.
Exactly.
You get what I'm saying? We've all, and that's why when we look at reference point, when people look at reference points, they go, oh, jiu-jitsu, Brazil. No, it's not Brazil. There was some modifications along the way. And I'm sure that happened in the Kung Fu era, you know, where it kind of split and separated. And
totally.
It's one lineage, you know, people don't get it.
Yeah.
It's one thing that man has always had. Whether it's picking up a bit of wood and hitting someone over the head with it, they've always done some form of Kali, right? They've always got a screamer, or when they're working in the fields with the sickles, and then, oh, this would be a great weapon, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
I doubt there's anything new. I think it's just been rediscovered or rechanged. Like, you know, there are certain things.
What I feel you have, and you summed it up there, there's nothing new. What I think has happened is we now have tribes of martial arts. They're tribes, and we're tribalistic people anyway. Humans are tribalistic.
Yeah.
And we go and we fit into our tribe, right?
Yeah.
And then another tribe comes along, or another member who we meet up with from another tribe, and we talk a universal language, whether it's English or whether it's martial arts, because that's a common denominator. During that information, that transmission of information, we go, hey, you speak the same language because you're doing the same stuff.
Yeah.
But we do this. Okay, but we do that. Okay, so now they both work, right? And I think that's what people don't get. And I think people are so quick to say, yeah, I'm jiu-jitsu and we're the best and blah.
We've had these conversations many times, myself and Nish, and you know what we're doing. The reason we're, you know, where we come from, like particularly us, some Mantis Kung Fu. I'm running a page, but we are trying to be inclusive, and it's just people sharing the same passion as us, because just like you said, you're doing stuff. There's a lot of common ground, and the rest is up for discussion. That's how I see it.
And we can all learn from each other, and that's the important thing. And grow as individuals.
That translates into every aspect of life.
Yeah, it does.
Whether it's the racism thing that's happening right now.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, there's some common ground here. Let's agree on the common ground and then deal with the discussions.
Yeah.
What we don't agree with, let's converse with that and find that common ground. Or whether it's martial arts, you know, because the day of this is better than that. I trained a very, very, he was probably one of the he was the biggest nightmare I'd ever rolled with in my life, ever trained with in my life. He was horrible to roll with. He's a Kung Fu guy, Nick Oshipchik.
Nick Oshipchik, yeah.
Yeah. Kung Fu background, Kung Fu guy, went into the UFC, never lost a fight by knockout or submission, won X amount of fights, lost his last 2 or 3 on decision. As a Kung Fu exponent, is a horrible person on the mat to train, like one of the most violent people, but is a gentleman and kindred spirit. He's a lovely human being.
Yeah.
But rolling with this guy, it would be elbow points, thumbs in you, this and that. Never experienced anything like it in my life. It was horrendous, you know? Yeah. And when he had training camps coming up, it was horrendous. His last retirement fight we prepared for, and he had a Kung Fu instructor with him who was teaching him. Do you remember him, Nish?
Yeah, Tai Chi.
Bill, Bill somebody. And I was, you know, his kind of main coach doing this stuff.
I was there, I remember. I was there.
Yeah, you were part of that training camp, right?
Yeah.
This is an elite fighter, Kung Fu fighter, an exotic. Go check him out in the UFC if you think there are no similarities in what we do.
Yeah.
He's a murderer. He would walk into the academy and people would be like, murderer! You know, he would just walk. Horrendous. And if you ask him, what do you do? What's your fighting form? You know his response on the UFC? Tai Chi.
Tai Chi, yeah.
Fighting art, I've never seen it, you know. And I've trained with current UFC fighters, and they're not as spiteful as that guy.
Yeah.
And that is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I remember, yeah. I remember coming on the first day, yeah. You rang me, you're like, come in, we've got a guy, Kung Fu guy.
Yeah.
I come in and he was doing, and I was like, Ed, he's doing Tai Chi. And you were like, train with him. And I was like, rare.
Horrible.
And you know who else I was really impressed with? That another UFC guy, Vaughn Lee. I'd love to get him.
Lee, another martial artist. Kung Fu, JKD guy.
Yeah, I'd love to get him on a call because he has a broad range of kung fu, traditional arts. Yeah.
Amazing guy. He was trained in our academy. We coached him.
Yeah.
He's now the head instructor at Phuket Top Team.
Phuket Top Team, yeah. So
if you watch his sparring videos, it's all center line punching, power punch, catching people.
Parries, catching,
everything. Trapping. He does a lot of trapping. Yeah. And I learned a lot of stuff like intercepting fists from him.
Yeah.
Like when someone's trying to jab, had to parry and intercept straight away rather than like a conventional boxer would be block and then jab.
Yeah.
He's like one move, block and parry,
Yeah,
and I use that in all of my sparring stuff today.
Yeah.
And when you see these guys and they label themselves as Tai Chi or this, and you see them fight, people go, no, you're not Tai Chi. They try to adopt who they are. But this is what I was talking about.
People trying to basket
but what I'm saying is he has a grassroots in Tai Chi. He teaches me the footwork of Tai Chi. As warm-up, we would do a warm-up and it would be the footwork. But he's always labeled as Tai Chi, although he's trained in Jiu-Jitsu, striking is Tai Chi. Because everything he does comes from a Tai Chi form.
Right.
Do you get what? Diego Sanchez, another UFC fighter.
Yeah.
Another exotic, right?
Yeah.
There are many of them.
Yeah.
There are many of them. And some of them have really good runs in the UFC, but what gets clouded by it is it's not fashionable to be Tai Chi. It's not fashionable to be Kung Fu. It's not even fashionable to be Gracie Jiu-Jitsu anymore.
No.
If you look at Damian Maia, one of the most unbelievable Jiu-Jitsu the world has ever seen. Anderson Silva took him apart. Anderson Silva claims to come from a Thai boxing background. He's a Kung Fu exponent as well.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not fashionable to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Well, it's all about the in thing. When Conor McGregor came out, look at all of his team members, look at all of how they fight. It's the same way. They fight exactly the same way. Look at Garner Nelson. Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, fights like a karate guy. His opening stance is karate, right? Lyoto Machida.
Yeah.
So fashionable until it becomes top of the food chain again.
Yeah.
When Hoist first came out, everyone was like, Jiu-Jitsu, not knowing that the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was something totally different than Japanese Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah. We are coming up to that 2-hour mark, which is, but we have one question, if you've got time, Ed. I think it's a good one. From Mark Roberts. Ed, great pearls of wisdom. Lots of controversy about police restraint techniques at the moment. How can police or anyone else restrain a violent person without hurting them?
Yeah, it's a very complex. Is it Mark? Sorry, the guys.
Yeah, Mark. Yeah,
Mark. So, Mark, it's a very, very complex situation. Looking at it from both sides. I'm retired now, by the way, but looking at it from both sides, we as police officers, we're not governed by who you are as an individual. What we get is something called a PNC readout. So I stop a vehicle and the vehicle says, this vehicle is registered, the person driving this vehicle is being violent to police, carries a firearm, etc., etc. So we're then having a constant flow of information which we have to make a justification on how we deal with you. We stop a vehicle, the person comes out ultra aggressive, whatever. We then have to take our own safety into account. The police techniques they used to use many, many years ago was the Metropolitan Police's all pile on technique, which was we would roll up in numbers and jump on you 30 strong, and it would look bad. Public perception, commissioner gets sued. Thank God they have had a little bit more restraint and control. Where it fails them is their techniques fail them, the training fails them, because they have something like 3 hours a month of training. That's what we were referring to earlier on about self-defense.
Yeah.
There's so much controversy at the minute and what happened in America. I was one of the first people to come out. I'm a supporter of police and law enforcement.
Sure.
I was one of the first people to come out and say what we saw there was horrendous. And that, that was not why it shouldn't happen. We need educating. The police need to learn. They need to be taught properly, because what we have at the moment is a group of people or instructors teaching people, and it's their empire. They haven't evolved, and they haven't grown, and they haven't done anything to progress in that training. And when new ideas come in, it's met with resistance because it's their empire.
Yeah.
They don't want the empire to be. Thankfully, they should be retiring soon, and we can upgrade that. But we really need to invest in control and restraint. You know, jiu-jitsu has the best control and restraint, I believe. We have a law enforcement program. We have a military program, which is specifically for that.
Yeah.
And it definitely needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
You know, but it's 12 of one and 24 of the other. It's such a mix, and it's such a fired up question at the minute, Mark. And, you know, I wish that they would say to me, Ed, come in and give a couple workshops for us. I wish they would open up and say, let other martial artists come in. Because when I was there, I was hot on positional asphyxia, people getting strangled and choked. And, you know, after the Joy Gardner incident, when people, they got rid of the headlocks and stuff. But unfortunately, as we know as martial artists, if you control that, if you dominate the head, you dominate the body.
Right.
You know, if you can off balance the center lines and eccentric, you can dominate the body, you know. And it's unfortunate that some of the tactics should be changed from headlocks to maybe tie plumb positions.
Yeah.
But when you're holding the plumb position, their hands are free to grab weapons or other things.
Right. Very difficult. Yeah.
Very difficult. You know, whether they're control and restraint, taking to the ground and releasing those moves, maybe that is something, an option they need to be looking at. But I would definitely like to have a stab at that and have a stab at, you know, educating people in control and restraint. Because
there is that big thing of the safety of the person that you're trying to restrain.
Remember what we were talking about earlier, Nish. If we have to get embroiled in something with someone, we're duty bound then to take care of it. If we wallet someone and they go on the ground and bang their head, we walk off and leave them. That's manslaughter. So we're duty bound for our actions if we're involved.
Yeah.
Under legal ramifications, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mad.
I think the easy, the simple answer, Mark, is it's on a sliding scale. It's very difficult. If someone's really aggressive, you know, how do you not hurt them? You know.
But I guess it comes down to
trying to hurt you. It goes against your human instinct, your reptile instinct, your animal instinct.
Yeah.
Survival is prevalent, you know.
Yeah.
And I guess it's understanding the situation, like you were saying. What if it's an 80-year-old man? Then,
right.
And you're not gonna want to strike and punch, get the elbow in. You're gonna want to restrain, say calm down, but a so he doesn't damage you or damage himself or anyone else.
I mean, there's so much in that niche. We could go on for another hour. There's so much.
Exactly. Yeah.
There is.
The 80-year-old man down, and all of a sudden he goes, "Okay, I'm going to comply. I'm complying."
Yeah.
You let him up. He takes a knife out.
Yeah.
What is compliance there? You know, where do we find that balance? And that's why it becomes an individual thing, not a collective.
Police, it's a risk assessment. On a moving risk assessment.
A running risk assessment, right? A dynamic risk assessment.
Yeah, dynamic risk assessment.
But what I think one big thing that came out of training with you is, for me, was understanding the law and where you are as a martial artist in your country or wherever. And I think that's one big takeaway that I many from you, but one of the ones I didn't know very well. And I thought, wait a minute, just like you said, Al, you were like, wait a minute, I thought it was, but no, it's not. Yeah. And you know, coming from Ed, a former police officer, has probably written some of the laws as well, or written some of the things as well, would understand that. So that's really important. Well, on that time, Ed, how can people find you?
Humble bragging. Humble bragging time. Listen, all my stuff is at EKBJJ, Instagram. That's where I am all the time. And I'm open to conversation. People follow me. If you're a member of the group of Nishan's guys and we're on Insta, I'll give you a follow back. And if you have Q&A, you know, I'm always open. I'm always available to kind of chat. And I build my life, you know, I really try to practice what I preach from a martial arts perspective. You know?
You're based near Blackstock Road?
Black Horse Lane.
Black Horse.
Black Horse Lane. You know,
Black Horse Lane, which is... Where is it?
17. It's under a Walthamstow postcode. So
so
it's that area, Black Horse.
Right.
Yeah. I'll post your details out. I'll put all the websites down.
Yeah, no problem, man. And listen, you know, I hope, you know, we get to have another conversation about another topic, or it's been great. And like I said, hopefully it's been educational in the sense that there are so many misconceptions.
Oh, no, definitely for me.
You know, and I'm sure a lot of people were expecting someone to jump on who was jiu-jitsu, go, we're the best, we fought in the US. We're far from that.
Yeah.
You know, we're still learning, we're still growing, we're still educating, and you know, forever a student.
Yeah. Well, Ed, thanks again for your time. And we'll get this on YouTube, and I'll share links with you. Everyone else, thank you for joining. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the interaction. Until then, nice one.
Everyone.
Thank you very much.